Hi, I'm Dr. George J. Sieg. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico, and I'm also a historian of religion, specializing in esotericism. So I also investigate new religious movements, particularly new religious movements and minority religions that are influenced by esoteric worldviews, beliefs, and practices. One great example of that is Satanism and the whole family of satanic new religious movements, which are part of the broader category of left-hand path spirituality. And a fascinating example of all those categories is here in Oklahoma City at the Dakhma of Angra Mainyu, previously known as the Church of Ahriman, which has garnered national and even international media attention on the Black Mass, which they publicly performed last night at the Oklahoma City Civic Center, followed by what's called a traditional exorcism, whereby traditional means derived from a reconstruction of ancient Persian diabolism and devil-worshipping practices. So in addition to all the other features of this religion, it also involves some historical reconstruction, and it involves a level of apocalyptic beliefs and eschatological dualism, such as I discussed with the head of the church, Dastur in my first interview with him prior to these events last night. So now I'm doing a follow-up interview with him to ask some final questions about the events that took place here, how they were received, and also a few other questions about the beliefs and practices of the church that came up in the course of my observations during the weekend. So, Adam, the first thing I want to ask in this interview is about interviews. I mean, you had interviews with me, you had interviews with Nightline, and also other media figures. So, what is the significance to you in terms of your practice and your tradition of all of this media attention? Obviously, you've sought it out. How does that relate to your practice and your worldview?
Well, part of it is, we're talking about the mechanics. We're using mechanical designs to spread the word of Ahriman, and when you go into Rudolf Steiner's concepts of using that mechanical thing as a way of communication, it really promotes that, bringing on the advent of Ahriman through the destruction of spiritual practice.
So I'm aware that some of Steiner's successors in the anthroposophical movement, authors writing in an even more apocalyptic style, have actually described cameras, for example, as the eye of Ahriman. Do you also see technology as an Ahrimanic device, as something that can deliver Ahriman into an incarnate?
I don't know so much of it would deliver Ahriman into an incarnate deal. It's more like the more technology we have, the more ability we have to report things so that it can't be altered. Because a human witness is very valuable. But if I have a camera witness, it's not valuable at all. And it has no judgment, it has no emotion, it's just a mechanical aspect. So the more we surround ourselves with that, the more we're going to become like that.
Now, you've talked about, in our previous discussions, about the evocation of demons, devils, into places, people, physical objects. What about machines and technology? Can devils enter machines?
That's something I never thought about, but I mean, if you can charge a simple item as a candlestick, I don't see why you couldn't charge a camera. I mean, look how many theories there are about music boxes being possessed and charged with spiritual entities. So if something as simple as that has very simple mechanics can be charged or possessed, I don't see why something like a camera or television could.
Now, obviously, there's a focus on apocalyptic beliefs in your religion and your magical practice in terms of opening the Enochian watchtowers. How significant of a contribution do you believe that a kind of public ritual media spectacle such as what was performed last night, how significant is that in contributing to apocalyptic processes?
The ritual itself is probably minor when comparative to the fact that you're affecting as many people as you possibly can, because you're changing the whole view of the Catholics and the Christians. I mean, they're going to do it This is God versus the devil. This is God versus the devil. This is God versus the devil. Well, the devil won. So now everybody's going to deal with the fact that the devil won. They went out there, they had a huge procession earlier in the day, then they had all the protesters and all that crazy insanity. Hell, they even started fighting each other, and that's the beauty of it all, and that was the hope, was to create that chaos within their own community. And when that chaos started, I didn't have to get involved. I just had to rile them up and get them there, and I knew it would debase itself anyway. Because anytime, especially with their hand-path religions, the pious are going to fight. They're going to fight each other because they're better than each other. Then you also have to take, in fact, you have all that online stuff. And I don't care which news story you go to, there are comments out there yin-yang, and they're all fighting each other. The Catholics fighting, the atheists fighting, the politicians fighting, other Satanists fighting, pagans.
Yeah, I was just about to ask. Isn't there also a lot of infighting within left-hand path and satanic communities?
I think there's a lot of infighting in every religion. We're just a little more vicious with each other, I believe. A little dirtier.
Why is that?
Because our moral bounds are a lot less, so we'll go places that a lot of other religions won't go.
And do you believe that that's sort of appropriate? Is that like in keeping with the style that you'd want to cultivate in a left-hand path religious practice?
Division among all things. The more we divide, the more we divide, the more we divide, the more evidence resonating keys, the more you divide, the weirder the thing becomes. And so, if you divide everything enough, then you can conquer all the divisions.
So, would you see any satanic movement, even a small minority movement like your own, as being a contender in somehow triumphing as the one that is standing last in infighting between satanic groups?
No, that's always going to exist because there's no set definition of Satan, the devil, or whatever the archetype you want to call it. One of the main things that the Christians can all agree upon is Jesus. They all agree upon that Jesus is the Savior. Now, where they go from there, who cares? We don't even have that. We can't even agree on a definition of Satan.
So how did you become convinced that Ahriman was the best form of the devil to be worshipped?
Doing a lot of research, and because it was the original duality one, plus already having a lot of tendencies toward Eastern practices anyway.
That's literally just what I was about to ask you about. I understand you've had a familiarity with Buddhism due to personal interest in your martial arts experience. You said you were a sixth degree black belt,
yes,
is that
sir.
right? In Aikido?
Huh?
Yeah, and you studied Buddhism in that context, but also in our conversation last night after the rituals, you mentioned some familiarity with Chan Buddhism. So, can you say a little bit more about what your experiences with Chan were like?
Well, for those who don't know, a little bit back up. Zen Buddhism actually starts with Chan Buddhism. I know you're aware of this from other folks.
Yeah, probably, quite right. Probably good to have something about that for viewers that are maybe less familiar with that. So, Chan Buddhism starts in China, based on what?
When they started moving away into the more of the warrior temples, and this is where the basis of the philosophy for the Shaolin temples start, and that's the Chan is what creates the discipline, because those monks were always hungry, they were always poor, they never ate, so they started exercising their body and clearing out their minds to become stronger, more powerful.
So did you also practice some asceticism within your martial arts practices?
I did outside of the dojo because the system that we studied was an offshoot of Tamiki Ryu, which was more like judo, because Tamiki was a judo master before he started doing Aikido. So it was more about education and physicalizing the art as far in moving meditation versus sitting meditation. So that was one of the things you had to weed out. There's also a school not far that's traditional yeshiva style, and I would work with that guy as well, working on the Kodo Dhamma and the spiritual aspects, because it just wasn't that. So I had to flip-flop between the two.
So how did you ever end up going from a predominantly non-theistic, meditation-based, slightly ascetic martial arts practice in a Buddhist context to being a devil worshiper?
Oh, that's a good question. how do I explain it? I told you the story about when the gentleman attacked a customer of mine when we were switching shifts out at Conoco, and he attacked him with a knife. I had to defend myself and kill him with self-defense.
And you presumably used your martial arts skills to do that?
Yeah.
Right.
If I can find it, I have the article. I don't know where it is right now. That was an Aikido journal where my teacher was interviewed about it. But anyway.
So this would be an example of exactly what those kind of martial arts are designed for, yes? Being able to successfully defend yourself against an armed opponent.
Yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, the guy hit his head twice.
The point being, normally in that martial arts tradition, subduing the opponent would be more desirable than killing the opponent, if possible. Is that generally correct?
With the way Ueshiba taught things, yes. As far as when I got westernized, I'm not sure where the line is.
Right. Fair enough. So, in any case, within the context of your practice at the time, there was certainly nothing reprehensible about killing someone who not homicidally attacked you with a knife, correct?
Yeah, not within the martial arts ethics, but within my own person.
I see.
There became an issue. And a lot of it was because of the Buddhist thing of rage, not to be rage, not to reach out in any type of attacking emotion. And so it was a huge crisis of conflict. Was it rage involved? Was I mad? Because I couldn't really remember it. I mean, it was on film and everything from the security, but I couldn't remember it. And you know, that's the way it's supposed to be in martial arts. You're not supposed to remember. It's supposed to just be reaction.
Almost very mechanical.
Yeah. So, okay, I have a whole lot of guilt here. I got a whole lot of anguish. I gotta handle this shit. I can't find a way to handle it in Buddhism because they're telling me I'm wrong because I was trying to feel rage. Okay, so we're gonna talk to the Catholic guy. I'm like, yeah, you should feel guilty, you should feel bad. That's more percent. Fuck you to do all this shit. And I'm like, no. Talk to the Baptist guy. Talk to, I don't even remember. And then I had a whole line of post-traumatic stress for staying on medications trying to deal with this shit. It was pretty bad. It went on for about 2 years, and then eventually I just said, fuck it. This is what everybody's scared of. Let's find out what the fuck it is. And I got the Satanic Bible. And I'm reading through there, and I come across self-preservation is the highest law. No matter how you preserve yourself, that is the highest law. So that's it. I'm done. This makes complete sense. This is where it is. Then I got to really studying into what LeVay was doing. And I've always been very...
Before you move on to talking more about LeVay, just to clarify one other feature, as I understand the Buddhist Dharma, any type of essential self is denied.
Exactly.
So does that mean that when you discovered LeVayan Satanism, you not only found that self-preservation made sense, you also found that his view of the self made sense. So you didn't just discover self-preservation, but also
deifying the self, yeah.
Deifying the self.
Yeah.
So do you, at that time, did you see the deified self as something in potential, or actually that there's a divinity already to the self?
At the time, I didn't know what to believe, but I knew that it was to take on personal responsibility for everything I did and not lean upon anything spiritual. And so it was really basically just normal LeVayan Satanism. When you get tired of LeVayan Satanism and go Buddhist, I went the opposite.
Right. And from there, then, what?
I got to I tore, like systematically, I mean not the actual pages, but I tore apart the different philosophies in the Satanic Bible. The first place I started was with the Enochian. And that's what led into rewriting Enochian to begin with.
So you practiced Enochian magic before you studied Persian stylism?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I took apart the philosophy. So we read Ayn Rand, we read Nietzsche, we read Might is Right, we went through 40 Laws of Power.
So you say were you working with others?
I'm just referring to myself. It's weird.
Are you Legion?
No, but there's a lot of study with Kelsey too.
I see. Okay.
And so the philosophy thing would be like, okay, so he took this, and that. Here's the actual pure philosophy, but we're going to throw that aside for right now because that has nothing to do with what I'm looking for. So then we got the infernal names. Going through the infernal names, I went through each of them. So where does this shit start? And it got down to Marduk, and it got down to Ireland. And so...
In the sense of being the oldest
Yeah.
names.
And so, Sumerian stuff, Zoroastrian stuff, showing, grab some Sumerian stuff. After we go to mention all this shit, I'm like, this is all polytheistic. This is not what I'm looking for.
Because it was polytheistic?
Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. So I did.
Why, what was particularly off-putting about polytheism?
Because to me, if I'm going to find the constraints of darkness and the darkness of what it is, it's got to be the complete anti-cosmic version.
Okay.
And Marduk and Tiamat was probably the closest thing, and this is what a lot of people argue, but I was like, it's still polytheistic. And you bring in the Anunnaki Brotherhood, and there's just too many things that are rambling around, there's too many different ideas, and it was cast aside. It was too complicated for its own. So I looked in the armor. There's not much to find. You have to literally start ordering fucking books and bringing books and reading that shit. It has probably been one of the most expensive studies I've ever invested in. Because honestly, I mean, it took me a long time. I eventually found like Avesta.org. I eventually found all this other stuff. But I had to go through a lot of channels and I had to go through a lot of books to find it. But the first book that I got a hold of when it came to really getting into the different styles of what was going on was The History of the Devil. And I can't think of the author's name off the top of my head. But he literally systematically goes through almost every culture that has like an evil presence. And it boils down to, in Zoroastrianism, it's the beginning of good versus evil, the duality system. I said, okay, jackpot. We found the thing. Now we go and we research that thing. And it became a very deep study because once you really start getting, especially in the Zayner, you find out that a lot of the Devas are Vedic Hindu gods. So now I'm like, oh shit. So now we gotta go get the Veda, we gotta get the Upanishads, we gotta get all that shit too. So here's more for me to look at. And it basically accumulated to very acutely into the Persian and Indo-Aryan stuff, was very acute for about 5 years straight. Things leading up to it and certain things trailing off of it, but the core thing was about a 5-year really acute study.
And so is the reason that you stuck with Ahriman rather than reverting to an attempt to reconstruct Indo-Aryan Vedic religion, is that because also the Indo-Aryans were polytheists and you found it too complicated like the Sumerians? So Ahriman has like the strength of a monotheism without actually being about God? Or is there some other reason you stuck with Ahriman rather than doing Vedic system?
The reason I stuck with Ahriman, aside from the Vedic traditions, was that even within the Vedic, and you see it carried over in Puranic as well, there is no good, there's no evil, it just is. You just do to learn. I can't get that.
So you were actually seeking something evil?
Yes. I was seeking something that was, well, what most pious would consider evil.
Why? What was aside from the instinct of self-preservation and an embrace of the passions like wrath, what is it about something evil that is such a significant draw?
Because when you seek evil, you find freedom. And the thing was, even though Hinduism offers you a type of freedom, they still tack on karma. So therefore, it's not really freedom. When you look into more esoteric aspects of Ahriman and it being a destructive force, it doesn't necessarily mean it's death. It doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be about murder. It could be about destroying aspects of the stuff that are holding you back. It could mean the destruction of other people in your life that are holding you back. And I think the reason that it bleeds into the Vedic Deva is that they're like angels are hermaphroditic in general Judaism and Christian forms of angelology. I think that they get confused because you see that there are 2 to 3 sides per Deva into what their attributes are. I think that's what the whole male and female aspect of one creature comes from. That's an interpretation there. And they can be used in either way. For example, you have Shiva, you have Mount Shai. It's the same creature, but it's 2 different sides of the same. But to me, Ahriman did not have that different side of the coin. It was, this is exactly.
And it's anti-theist.
Exactly. So, a lot of my internal angst and anger and hatred were in connection of hating God, hating the universe, hating people in general.
So you identified that anti-cosmic instinct in yourself even before you discovered Ahriman?
I would say that.
And had you identified that anti-cosmic urge when you were studying Levian Satanism, or did you not realize yet that you were anti-cosmic in your inclination?
I think that I fought that a lot since I was 5 years old.
But you never really recognized it until when?
I would say till about 12 or 13.
So the whole time you were practicing Buddhism, you had an anti-cosmic inclination.
Yeah, you would say it was more probably my internal and personal feelings about things are probably closer to the destructive Tibetan ways.
Right.
But I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't know what I was dealing with.
Now, have you also studied left-hand path Tibetan systems or any of the tantras?
I've looked through them. I'm not that impressed.
Why?
It just didn't appeal to me, man.
So the aesthetics, or is there something about the system that also seems less effective to you?
I'm not into drinking blood out of skulls. I'm not into playing with dead pieces. I'm not into doing anything with dead.
So it's the necromantic elements. And I think in our previous interview we discussed that although necromancy is practiced by some church members and certainly by some Diabolists, necromancy is not personally your cup of anything, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to be drinking out of a cup.
So,
It's not going to happen.
now, in terms of comparing to other systems, you use the term anti-cosmic yourself. Of course, we also use this academically quite a lot, both to classify dualism, but also to describe a particular family of traditions, some of which are satanic. In fact, sometimes it's just called anti-cosmic Satanism. I favor making a distinction between the sort of anti-cosmic gnosis and esotericisms and the properly satanic versions. Either way, you may be familiar with these traditions, and if so, I'm curious of your opinion. Have you encountered any of the works of the various anti-cosmic Satanists that were, for example, produced in Scandinavia? I'm thinking of things like the Current 218. So you are familiar with the Current 218?
I'm not going to say this person's name. He and I had quite a nasty fight online. Then he gave me all of his materials. And
so he gave you the materials because he decided he respected you after a nasty fight, or because he was trying to convince you he was right, or?
Because he was trying to convince me he was right. He lost the argument, and so he wanted to convince me he was right by hoping to dupe me into his material. I went through the 218 material. I laughed at it. Jeremy was sitting right there when I was going through it. Because it is too much of this amalgamy of this intrinsic need to focus on this dark Kabbalah shit, and then moving into this sigil bullshit.
So you don't like the Kabbalah?
I hate the fucking Kabbalah.
Why do you hate the Kabbalah?
Because to me, people misinterpret what it is. Everybody's like, I'm going to go into the clip off, and I'm going to deal with the Sephiroth, and I have an astral temple, and all this weird ass shit. When you actually read the shit, it's guided meditation. Get the fuck out of here. You're creating an ideal by unlocking certain aspects of the subconscious mind with the sigil and the seal that you're working with, so that you can guide yourself through that thing and confront different aspects of yourself. To me, that's what it is.
And so also you don't like sigils?
If you're going to print something on your own mind, you better be really fucking careful. That's why I would say if you want to work with sigil magic, go into Austin Spar. Don't use all these old fucking keys and seals that have been around forever.
So in terms of sigil magic, the way it's practiced in contemporary settings, you actually would favor the chaotic approach or the Sparian approach. When you say you dislike the use of sigils, you're talking about the standardized sigils of the grimoire tradition.
Yes.
Okay, and those are a feeture of some anti-cosmic Satanism.
Yes, it is.
Other,
They're deep in their particular stuff, because their main one is Azazel and Lilith and that type of thing, which really reflects a lot of Luciferianism as well. Because to me, if you're using the Austin Spar method and you are creating your own sigils to work with, then you know what you're doing to yourself. these older ones, who knows what these guys who designed them, what their plans were with them, what they're actually doing, and what they were meant to do. Occultists are crazy like that. They'll just throw shit out and let you fuck with it.
So that's a bit of a tangent, but since you use the term and since it obviously sometimes comes up in the opinions of like viewers, interviewers, media folks, things like that. How do you personally distinguish the difference between some kind of religious epiphany or magical experience or diabolical encounter? How do you distinguish that from, for example, insanity? I mean, you mentioned earlier having experiences with PTSD. You may be familiar with mental illnesses generally. I also teach psychology courses, including abnormal psychology. Where do you, as a practitioner, draw the boundary between diabolically inspired and crazy? Or is there a line?
Well, I mean, when you get into deeper ritual workings, a lot of them use breaks in reality through drugs, a lot of times through hallucinogens, mushrooms, opiates.
And as we know, the Vedic Aryans and the Iranians were using the Soma drug, so
which is more like a Fedra than it is cannabinoid. But even in voodoo cultures and every other culture, you see the use of hallucinogenics to create that break in reality. That break in reality is what connects the subconscious and the conscious mind. But there's other ways to control that without having to have a break in reality. Now, to me, the line is drawn is if I'm experiencing something and I'm still consciously aware of what I'm experiencing, most likely I'm moving into something insane. If I'm experiencing something that I'm not consciously aware of it and I don't see what's going on, I think that is more diabolic undertaking.
Wait, so let me be sure I understand you correctly. You're saying that if you're conscious of your abnormal experiences, that's more likely to be insanity. So you're saying then that as a practitioner, you would actually want to maintain a sense of normality and not be conscious of weird things going on.
In other words, I want the subconscious mind, like in martial arts, to take over what I'm doing, so that I have no memory of it.
And
that's why we record our rituals. That's why we record a lot of our workings, so I can go back and see what happened.
so this reminds me a lot of chaos magical preferences for forgetfulness and the notion that a perfect magical act may be largely either unconscious or non-conscious. This is something you also favor. And is this often the case for you, that you will just blank on your ritual and magical practices?
Usually by the time I get through the evocation and the opening calls, like with the exorcism, how Res of the Mother was, then I call for Angra Mainyu, blah, blah, blah. Usually by the time I get through that, I'm done. I'm on automatic.
But that doesn't involve diabolical or demonic possession? Or sometimes it does?
I don't know. I'm not aware. So I can't answer that truthfully, because I'm not sure.
Now, is this typical of all Harmonic magical practitioners in your church? In general, do people forget the conjurations?
I try to get people to that point, but it doesn't always occur.
What do you do to cultivate that level of forgetfulness?
What do you mean by cultivate?
Well, you say you try to get people to that point. How do you get someone to the point of not remembering what has happened?
Well, there are a lot of technological things that we bring into a ritual that you and I have yet to discuss. First off, with the music that we're using, it's not just music. Obviously, we're using soundtracks from movies to drive emotion. There is theta binary beats, white noise that's in there. There's straight out chaotic black noise that's put in there. Then there's also backmasking of certain teachings that's put in there. And then there's
so in your practice, satanic backmasking is actually real?
Yes. You couldn't tell that with the music last night?
Well, if it's backmasked, it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be conscious of it, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's another layer that a lot of people aren't aware of, forward masking, or backmasking the backmask. And what that is scary. Your conscious to subconscious link can only handle 7 heavily symbolic words per minute before that veil drops. And a lot of people can use conversational hypnosis to break that veil to make those types of implants.
He's talking about things like neurolinguistic programming?
Uh-huh. So if I take highly symbolic words, usually I run about 10 to 12, then I just repeat it through in a minute cycle, and then I just blend it in.
When you say highly symbolic words, you mean like the names of the devils and
No.
things?
Like blood, like death, sword.
So you're talking about words that, for example, would provoke strong associations in like a word association test or something.
Yeah. And so you have that, you per minute, was it around 45, 46 per minute that we're running with the forward masking? So you have that layer, you have the back masking layer, you have the layer of binary BCM, layer of black noise, just straight chaotic black noise.
And what's the purpose of including these type of words? Is it to provoke subconscious
Exactly.
hormonal responses?
Not so much hormonal, but it is to break the conscious and subconscious divide so that it can very easily project into the collective consciousness.
Now, earlier I interviewed Herod Jeremy Melvin, who described that in the course of his initiation and training toward priesthood, sleep deprivation was involved.
Yes.
He described a 6-day period of sleep deprivation. Is this customary and traditional in the training of a priest in this tradition?
Yes. For us, it is very customary because you have to be able to function, but let the subconscious run everything. That's the same way with ritual. You have to be able to function, but the subconscious has to run everything. But like I was telling you earlier, the subconscious mind is always aware of everything that's going on. But if I can switch gears and let that take control, what I'm doing magically, I have higher chances of getting my goals attained if I don't try to fuck it up with my own intellectual doubts or any other intellectual issues I have in the conscious mind.
Now, as you're probably aware, satanic ritual abuse mythology has focused highly on the idea of rituals being practiced and then forgotten and repressed, on the idea of reprogramming the subconscious mind. Many of the kinds of imageries and techniques you've just described are a feature in that mythology. Is that because that mythology drew from real practices but took them in a lurid direction? Or is that because you actually evaluated this mythology and extracted concepts that sounded useful and then figured out how to use them effectively? Or a bit of both?
We started there and moved into the Thule Society. In the Thule Society, when you pull back the covers, when you can find the information, that's where it is.
Now, what are the sources you've used to research the Thule Society?
There was a lot of underground information that was given to me by somebody out in California. I sent it years back. We try to move that shit around so nobody gets hold of it.
Now, when you say Thule Society, do you mean material relevant to the original German Thule-Gesellschaft? Or do you mean the White Order of Thule?
More into the darker SS when it goes into the Black Sun issues of programming the folks, programming the population. Because when you look into I can't say this shit, diabolica, where basically you have the pentagonal form in the middle of the room, the celebrant's in there, he's got the strobe lights going, he's got the music going, you're using shit like ionizers, you're using certain body symbology and everything else. When you pull that apart, you get a lot of the elements of our magic. We just expand the pentagram a little bit more. The things that you're talking about look like the back masking and all these types of things. A lot of that was experiments and psychological experiments that we did, and it's easy. You have to read into it. It's not just out there in the open. You have to read into what was documented. And that's how you see these things coming apart. And in all honestly, I really don't care what the Church of Satan may or may not say, but they're the ones who really brought the back masking and forward masking into the foreground for Satan.
Now, you mentioned the Black Sun, which of course has a strong conspiracist culture surrounding the image. There's a strong interest in that imagery in neo-Nazi occultism. How much of that material do you see as valid?
Some of it is very valid, some of it just needs to be pitched. I mean, it's like everything else. There's gems and everything, and there's garbage surrounding them. You have to pick through the garbage to find the gems.
And do you believe that the black sun imagery also originates in the ancient Middle East or in Iran? Was it associated with Ahriman? Or do you associate it with Ahriman?
I associate it more with the Vedic and the Aryanic stuff that went in through that time period. I don't really see it in the Persian stuff.
So in your own practice, although there's some influence from anthroposophy, from Steiner, there isn't really much Ariosophy in your own practice. You don't focus on Aryan identity or anything like that?
I don't see any point in focusing on a genealogical construct, because with the way the purity of the races is rapidly declining, there's no point in even fucking with it. I think that eugenics should be applied, and when people pick their partner, they should probably try to pick the best specimen they can in order to create the best youth to project their seed into. But beyond that, it's...
Now, why would someone like yourself, who identifies with such an anti-cosmic perspective, think it would be desirable to produce better children?
Because that's your natural animal urge, is to reproduce.
But as a natural animal, why would you care about the quality of your offspring?
That's one of the things I think that separates human from animal, is that I do think they have cognitive thought, but I don't think it's as complex in the cognitive thought.
So when you say anti-cosmic, you're not anti-nature? Or anti-body? You're just anti-order?
I'm not I don't go against my animal nature. You can't do that, because that creates a disruption in the self.
So what do you go against when you go against the cosmos?
Anything that's going to enslave our grandmas.
So for you, cosmos is restriction.
Yes.
And that's found in the social order, but it's also found in the spiritual world?
And it's also found within yourself as well. I mean, there's aspects of self that have to be destroyed, because that's holding you back. But as far as indulging your animal nature, you have to keep that indulgence up, or eventually a demon's going to come along and pop that cherry anyway, and then you're going to have an explosion. So it's up to you to monitor yourself to keep that shit deflated before some demon comes and pops that bubble.
So do you, in the sources that you investigated pertaining to imageries like the Black Sun or the Fool Society, how much of that material seems to you in any way related to the techniques or practices of the Ahrimanic tradition as you define it, or how much has anything to do with the devil, or was that all sort of unrelated to Satanism and devil worship?
As far as the aspects of the theology of the religion itself, it doesn't have much to do with it. The aspects of ritualizing in different ways comes from that aspect. But to me, the whole Ahrimanic system that is in several parts. You have the religious mythology, you have the philosophical, which is like the Steiner, the minus right things of that nature. Then you have the magic side. Then you know, the actual occult magic side. Then you have the modern magic side. There's like the music, the Tesla coils, the mirrors, working on that. And then there is the spiritual side that comes with the spiritual science, along with the meditation techniques and everything else. Sometimes it isn't always congruent, but I think you're beginning to see that. And there are only pieces that are taken to make fit what I want to make fit. It's not a purist system. I don't see how you could ever create a left-hand path ideology and it being a purist system. You look at how LeVay set things up, you look at how Ford set things up, you look at how any leader of Satanism set things up. It's not everything is in congruency. So I have to take each aspect. What is the most powerful aspect of each aspect? And how do I bring that into the practice? So, when going through like Norse mythology and running it in back into Blavatsky and running it into these different types of things, what studying all of that for the techniques that we're talking about with the music, the using more, instead of using sigils, the rune concept, but instead of using like direct Norse runes, using cuneiform, if you do it properly. And to me, running through cuneiform instead of sigil magic, it's similar, but yet it's different. Does that make sense?
Because cuneiform is not truly an alphabet, and but also not totally pictographic.
Yes.
So you're saying that, thank you for that detailed summary. It sounds like you're saying that there are elements of syncretism of technique, but also an interest in purely reconstructing as much of a true devil worship as possible. So where do you see this developing, say, over the next 20 years? In my interview with your Herbad, he described the likelihood of an aharmonic incarnation, or at least that's something that's desired by your tradition. So where would you like to see the movement associated with Ahriman that you're contributing to? Where would you like to see that developed 2 decades from now?
I would like to have at least, in 20 years, at least 30 other branches going off. Hoping within that time, whether we know or not, hell, the advent of Ahriman may have already happened for me. I'd like to see that go off and get that going. What looks like to me, and what feels like to me, there is a large social unrest through the world. And with the way our government is driving the economy, there's going to be a social unrest in America soon. I can't, soon meaning could be anywhere between 5 to 10 years. So when we're looking in that perspective, we're going to have to figure out a way to survive when that social unrest occurs. And that right now is my main concern.
You mentioned earlier desiring to establish a community with a clan-like structure. Do you believe that this would be a suitable social environment in which to survive an apocalyptic scenario?
If need be, yes, because that way, if the community is used to taking care of the individuals and the individuals are used to taking care of the community, then you'll have that close knit, so that if anything tries to penetrate that, natural disaster, disease, whatever, it can be handled quicker because everybody will work together to deal with this issue.
So is there anything else that you would like to contribute to the academic study of your tradition or of Satanism or the left-hand path in general? Scholars don't always know what questions practitioners think are important. You've obviously been talking to a lot of media, and also to me. So I wanted to end with a completely open-ended question. What would you like scholars of the subject, or even the public, to know about devil worship, and particularly about Ahrimanic devil worship?
I think one of the huge misconceptions that people have, because when everybody thinks Ahriman, they think analytical destruction. The deadliest of all devas was always about death and corruption, and that death is where it maintains its power base. And I think that is an inversion, because as far as I'm concerned, as a whole, Muslim is obsessed with death, because he needs to return that energy, he needs to return that peace, that spark that's in all of us. So if he needs that in return, he's the one who's going to be within death. Yes, the devil is about corruption, yes, the devil is about destruction, but he has to corrupt that in the living and take that away in order to gain his power. And I don't think that there's any power to be found after the soul is left. And that's why it should not be a death cult or a death worship. It should still revere in life, but it's about how much an individual can do to corrupt and to change things in the Ahrimanic sense before he dies.
And so, I guess in conclusion, do you feel that you've corrupted and changed some things here in Oklahoma City after last night?
I would say we've pretty much done it nationally, if not internationally. The biggest thing that they always talk about, the reflection of the microasm affects the macroasm. If we affect enough of the microasm, if we affect enough of the individuals in each piece, we can affect it even harder here. So if you take a person and you put them through a traumatic event, you're knocking open that ego protection that they have, that bubble of this is how reality is, until something comes in and breaks that reality. So if we can do it to enough people on that one level, what's keeping me from taking the macrocosm and breaking that? And that is how the heavier sides of anti-cosmic spirituality is affected in my way, in my mind. Because if it's all changed on each individual, and they all have a congruent belief that creates that collective consciousness, and you break all that on each individual level, that has to come apart in my theory.
Well, then I think our conversation will end on that appropriately apocalyptic note, just like my interview with your Herbot. And so I want to thank you then also, in terms of finality, for giving me your last interview of the week. I appreciate the time you took to explain your beliefs and practices in such detail. And so those of you who are watching this video can, I hope, look forward to an even more detailed analysis of these beliefs and practices, and a comparison of them to other forms of anti-cosmic spirituality, other forms of left-hand path esotericism, and satanic and diabolical religious practice in the form of some articles. So thank you very much for your time.